Welcome to the Building in Decentraland video series. These videos are recordings of the live sessions of the inaugural class offered by the VR Academy, which is a school within Decentraland University. My name is Carl Fravel, and I'm the instructor of this course. These videos are largely unedited recordings of the live class sessions. The descriptive text provided below this video includes information about Decentraland, a virtual reality on the blockchain, the Decentraland University and its schools, including the VR Academy, and the course materials for this course, including the lessons and assignments. I hope that you enjoy studying these materials and that they help you to become a very capable builder in Decentraland. Welcome, everyone. This is our fourth session of the Building in Decentraland class. I'm going to wait for a moment because I restarted it and want to make sure everybody gets back in.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Hello.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started with two review items. I might take a few questions also, and then we'll preview lesson 4. One thing I want to review is how to get a scene to hold to have a file, a model that you've created or obtained. This lesson and assignment will have you getting a model from an online store or a free library and putting it in. But some people were having troubles when trying to do that with existing models they had or from the builder. So I kind of want to go through that, show a couple different ways that you can create a scene and bring a model into it. One way to do it is to start with the builder. So I'm going to demonstrate that first. Somebody I think needs to mute. If you're not actually speaking, I'd appreciate you muting your mic. There's somebody on the line that has their mic open, it's not muted. There we go. No, still on. If you could check and make sure your mic is muted. Thank you. So I'm just going to pick some scene here. Here's a scene that has a tree and some grass. I think it's, yes, one parcel, a very simple scene, tree, a rock, and some grass. So so you can use the builder to create a basic scene, even if the objects in it aren't what you're going to ultimately use, but you can kind of get the ground right, and you can get a few things placed in the scene and move them around to about where you want them. And then you download it using that button up in the upper right. Let me show you that again. That's here where it says download scene. And then you click the download and you get a zip file. And in that file, you will find there's actually two representations of the scene in here. One is a JSON file, which is what you actually, if you upload the scene back into the builder, it looks at that. It does not look at all the other files. All the other files are for the SDK. So this download is both a backup for the builder in case you flush your cache in your browser or something, you want to have a way to restore the scene in the builder. But the rest of the files are destined to be used in an SDK scene. That's what they're for. And if you edit those and then put them back in the zip file, the upload back into builder ignores them because it just uses the builder.json file. So given this, I'm going to take these files here, and I'm going to actually skip the bin file because it is the result of a build, and we're going to build it in the SDK. So I'm going to copy those things from here, and I have a scene started over here. This is lesson 3 review material. So I'm going to make a scene entities from the builder. It's just an empty directory I had started. And click, drag, drop. And so now we have an SDK scene. It's not built yet. You can't run it yet. In fact, the SDK, the local part of the SDK isn't here yet, but let's take care of that. So I'm going to get this URL here and open up a copy of command prompt and say CD space and then Control V to paste that in. And I'm in this scene now. And if I type npm this, because there's a package.json file in here that specifies that what the dependencies are to build this thing, and the dependencies are the SDK. By doing just this, I will get the local part of the SDK installed into the directory, rather as if I had done a DCL in it. But you can do it after you have content in it. It builds the local SDK that you need. And when you use npmi, you also, I think somewhere here, I thought it told you the version. In any case, if I do a DCL start now, I should see the scene with the tree and the rock and the grass. It's now doing the build, including creating that bin file, that bin directory. So now let's look at the source file in here and see the pattern of code that is generated by the builder for putting objects into a scene. And we're going to edit that a little bit to put something else in the scene. So you go into source here and open up games.ts. I just double clicked on it and it opens up in Visual Studio. And the way the builder builds the scene is that it first builds an invisible entity because it has no shape added to it. It's an invisible entity at 0, 0, 0 position, unrotated, and scale of 1. And it's just called scene. They're using a variable called scene. So they do a new entity called scene. They give it a transform with basically all the default values, which basically identifies it as being in the southwest corner of the scene, of the parcels of the scene. And they're adding the transform that they just made to the scene using add component to replace. And then they insert the scene into the engine so that it'll render. It doesn't actually render, but the engine keeps track of it. It doesn't show anything. And then they build a number of objects. I think there'll be a grass, a pine tree, and a rock. So let's just go through them. They all are coded the same way. So this is one object being put into the scene to be shown. And so they instantiate an entity into an arbitrary variable name. They name it basically the same as the GLB file's name. And then they set the parent of it to the scene. That can be done anywhere in the process down to where you add it to the engine. they create a new shape object, GLTF shape object. That's a shape that will hold the mesh of a GLB or GLTF file. And the constructor, the initial parameter that you need when you create a GLTF shape is the path in your scene from the root of the scene down through the models directory to pick up the GLB file. You can use single or double quotes. Their code generator uses single quotes. And then you add that GLTF shape to the entity. Now the entity has shape. It doesn't yet have a transform, a place. So what they do is they create a transform. They define all three of the sets of parameters for a transform: a position, rotation, and a scale. And the position is 8 east, 0 up, 8 north, which puts it right in the center of the scene on the ground. They use a one-time scale, and this means no rotation. But as I explained in a previous lesson, quaternion is a little hard to work with, and we could talk about those a little bit more later in the lesson if you have time. They also instantiate a pine tree and a rock that we had put in. Very similar patterns. The main difference is the name of the model that's being picked up is different. And the position. This is not as far east, so it'll be to the left. Oh, excuse me, the ground they put, of course, they center in the scene. And then the tree is to the left, a little bit to the west of center. And the rock here is both to the east of center and to the north of center, because these would be 8, 8 at the center. In each case, they create the entity, they create a shape, they create a transform, they add the shape to the entity, they add the transform to the entity, and then they add the entity to the engine. From what I can tell, you don't have to add the entity to the engine if its parent has been added to the engine. In fact, I've seen some warnings in the console that says that object's already in the engine, please fix it. And I think that a way of doing it, I think it would work just fine if this line here wasn't there. But their code generator puts it there, so it's kind of interesting. Maybe it complains if you do it the other way around, put the entity in and then set the parent. But anyway, it does sometimes generate a warning. And it's, in my experience, because you're both adding it to the engine, and you're setting its parent to something that is already in the engine, the scene. So that's the code pattern if you're coming from the builder. So let's add one more thing to it. I'm just going to copy this code here and paste a copy of it at the bottom of the scene here. And it will complain because I'm defining rock large twice. Let me go find maybe another tree. So I'll say pine tree. And this variable up here isn't complaining, but it's resetting the parent of something that's already has parent set. What I really want to do is use pine tree here too. The parent I'm trying to set is the pine tree's parent. The GLTF shape is complaining because I'm redefining const, a variable I already had. So I'm going to use pine tree here and add the word shape to the end. And I need to use that shape when I add it to, and put the object I'm adding it to there. The transform 4 is already in use, so I could call it transform 5, I could call it transform pine tree. I like using names. They use numbers because they're just running through a loop and generating it by number, but transform pine tree. So I have a pine tree, I have a pine tree shape, and I have a, actually I would usually do it like this, pine tree transform. So all the variables start with pine tree, and then at the end you have something, if it's not just the entity, you have a shape or transform. It's typical in coding practice to use lowercase first letters for variable names and uppercase first letters for class names like these. Not required, but it's just a common practice. And then I need to put this pine tree someplace else than where something else is sitting. So let me put it more towards the front center of the scene. So the center, east-west, is 0, but instead of putting it kind of centered to the back of the scene, I'm going to move it farther south towards the way you're where you're standing when you first come in the scene. So put it at 4. And now I need to, this is the entity name again here, and the transform name, which is this guy. I'm just double clicking on these to select the whole thing and hitting a Control C. Double click to select the whole thing, hit a Control V to replace it. And then I want to add the pine tree, Control C, double click, Control V. That's what I'm adding to the engine. So I think other than the GLTF model path up here, everything now has been updated. There's no references to the previous variable names of the previous items. So let's go get a GLB and put it in here and change the path. So I have a bunch of trees in my library, which is in OneDrive, so it's stored in the cloud as well as on my machine. And let's use a tree that was made for me by CyberMike. And I have I'm sitting here staring, which tree do I want to use? Is there a collection of trees here somewhere? Let me look at dates. Yeah, here they are. So I have a pine tree, and my most recent version of it is here. And this is a typical way I store stuff. I have a OneDrive, or you could use Google Drive and synchronize it, but it's both on my machine and in the cloud. I have all kinds of audiovisual data. So under that, I have 3D models and textures. Then I organize that by either like where I got it from or who made it for me. If I where I got it from, like CG Trader site, then under here I have who the maker is. And I do that in part because I want to know and keep track of who made it, because it may have licensing conditions that I have to meet. Like I may have to give a credit to the maker, or I may want to, even if I don't have to. So I like keeping track of where I got it from and who the maker is. But if I go back here to CyberMike's stuff for me and go to the pine tree and the latest version, within that I work in Blender mostly. So the blend file I put here, and then I put GLTF and GLB files in a GLTF subdirectory. So under here, there is both a GLTF and all the things it needs, but in addition, I also have a GLB, which is all we need for this. You could put them in separate directories, or you could just export one of them. Sometimes it's nice to have the GLTF content so you can mess with the images after you've exported it. But a GLB, it's all packed together, so that's what we're going to use. Excuse me. No, that's loud. Our scene here. I'm going to go up from the source directory to here, go to the models. They made a directory for each model with the model in it, and I'm going to make one more. Actually, I'm going to drop it in here first and then use its name for the folder name as well. One moment. Click here, F2 gives me a name. I can say a new directory here. paste that in, drop this over into it. All right, so my path is going to look like models B pine. So I'm going to go back to my source code and put that in as the path is from like here to here, right? That's the path part. And Windows has a backslash, and I have to fix that. And then the name of the file, click F2, Control A to get the whole thing, Control C to copy it, and pasting from there to there. Now I think the pine tree is going to show up towards the middle front of the scene. So I want to Control S to make sure I've saved it. Go back here, Control C, and DCL start. Rebuild the scene. And I forgot to put the -B on the parameter, so I got a new browser. I'm just going to close the old one. Well, something's not quite right here. What's not right? It's stuck to. That's a really interesting. It's a huge model. I guess that's part of the problem. So let me scale it down in the source code here. Instead of making it 1 times scale, I will make it 0.2 times scale. See how that looks. Using a -B this parameter this time so that I don't open a new window. It loads in this one. I just wait for the scene to finish building, and I get this kind of a Control C to exit message. And now if I hit a Control F5 in this window, it will reload it. So something very strange going on here. Do I have this tree is like way far up in the air? Oh, so I think part of the problem with this tree is not only is it way far up in the air, but it's also its position might be, well, maybe that's just it. It's more reasonably sized now, so let me make it 1/10 that big. And by the way, this is the reason why I built the tool I call Builder HUD, is because you can spend about half your time tweaking all these parameters to get things exactly like you like them. So I think that I just can hit Control F5 here and not have to restart the scene. That's better. Now it's up in the air a little bit, but we've fixed that by giving it a position of like, what's that? It's about halfway of eye height, right? Eye height is about 1.7 meters, so I can say maybe negative 0.8 of a meter, maybe, just to pull it down.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hey, how's it going? Just a quick question. Like when you go to publish in the builder, and any of your models are below the below, I guess that would be like the plane. It won't allow you to publish it. Now, would you run into the same thing here if you were trying to actually publish it to a piece of land?
They've loosened up the rules in the SDK deployment, and they may tighten them back up. They didn't want you to put things way down below the ground before. But recently I've been able to push things down. I also am able to push things outside the bounds of the scene. So I think they're going to be tightening up the location constraints for deploying scenes. But sometimes, the center of this model, excuse me, escape key, the center of this model may actually be up here somewhere. I mean, it's clearly that the center of the model is actually the
halfway.
center of the, yeah, I'm wrong. It's the center of the model is below the tree. So I had to push down to get the bottom of the tree so clearly I'm able to, in at least in the preview and currently in the deployment, I'm able to push it down such that the origin of the mesh is below the ground. I think they will continue to allow that, but they probably will reinstate the rule that you can't have something outside the scene, like over in your neighbor's property. Right now, I don't think they're actually have that constraint in place. So let's look back the code one. Did I answer your question? The answer is I don't know how it'll be when they go live. Right now, they're very loose. They're not even enforcing the texture limitation at 512 that they've always said is the limitation. I have had troubles when I've gone above 1024. It seems not to know what to do with the extra part. It really messes up the texture. But so far I've been able to do 1024 by 1024, certainly 512 by 512. I think they are constraining the number of triangles you can place up and some of the other limits, but just not some of the graphical stuff of the appearance of it. So the answer is it may change in the future, but right now that constraint doesn't exist in the SDK. But I think that they recently have in the builder is they don't want people to lose something. Like I pushed out down below the ground and where did it go? Because you don't really have any way to recover that. And none of their models require that. So that's probably why they did that constraint in the builder. They're trying to keep the builder really simple for people who just have very little experience with modeling or scene building. So I just want to review one more time. The steps in creating and making an entity visible are, first of all, creating the entity itself, which says new entity. And an entity doesn't have any constructor parameters. It's just empty parentheses. And then you, somewhere in this time frame here, you set the parent to something else if you want it to be positioned relative to something else, typically a scene entity, which itself is invisible. And then you create a shape for it. This could be a box shape. It could be a GLTF shape. If it's a GLTF shape, you have to say where the GLTF model is. If it's a box shape, you don't have a parameter there for the constructor of the box shape. A box shape would be an example of a primitive, whereas a GLTF is not a primitive. It's an external model being imported. Then you add that. You don't need the or replace. That's optional. That's useful if perhaps the object already had a shape added to it and you wanted to replace it. It won't cause an error. If you just add a component when you already have one, it would cause an error. But when you know that you're only adding just the one, you could just say add component. What you're adding is the variable of the shape that you made. And then you create a new transform object. And there's several ways you can set these values in a transform. Any of these that you leave out will get their default values. But if you give all three of them, then you've set the position, rotation, and scale. The rotation is set as quaternion in the way they're doing it, but you may want to use a Euler because it's a little easier conceptually to understand what to do with the three variables in parameters in a Euler, but quaternion is quite mysterious. Why this is an unrotated object, yeah, you can go study that if you want. And then scale would be a vector 3 object that has 1, 1, 1 if you don't want to resize it. Then you have to add the transform to the entity. So you've added a shape to the entity and a transform to the entity. And then you add the entity to the engine. If you don't add it to the engine, it exists in code, but it's not been handed to the runtime engine that renders the scene. So it's invisible. It doesn't exist. It doesn't really exist in the scene. It exists in memory, but it doesn't exist in the scene. I think that if you don't add it to the engine and you don't set its parent to something that is in the engine, which would mean that this line isn't really needed, but if you're not doing something to make it render, it doesn't count against your poly count, I'm pretty sure. Only the things that are being rendered do. So if you have a dynamic scene where you're having some things appear and disappear, your quota of triangles are the things that are currently visible. That's where you have to keep it limited. You can hide things by removing them from the engine, or you can actually destroy them by assigning the variable to null or to something else. All right, so there's one way to get code together to show something in a scene. I'm going to show you another way. I'm going to go into another directory I made for the lesson today. DCL init creates a box entity, if you recall. So if you've created a new directory, and this directory is empty, and you do DCL init, which is how you would start a new scene if you're not getting it from somebody else's code. If you're getting it from somebody else's code, you're probably going to use an npm-i if they have all the other files that are needed in the scene besides the SDK. But this was an empty directory, so I'm using DCL init. And if I look in here, I have a scene. And I type code source g tab return. So this scene, as you recall, has a rotating box, and I don't really want to have a rotating box. So I'm just going to take the system thing out entirely. I just want the box, and I'm not going to add that rotator system that I just deleted to the engine. And down here, I have and here's the click handler. I'm going to get rid of that. All I want is the cube. So what I have here is they've coded a function for spawning a cube. And in it, guess what? You create the entity, create the transform, create the shape, add them to the entity, and you add the entity to the engine. And because you're setting the variable, the actual variable for in the code for the cube here, the function actually returns this variable that's a temporary variable inside the function. It returns it out so we can put it into a permanent variable here. And so this cube is going to be, why are there only 3 parameters when there's 9 up here? Well, it's because the only thing they're setting in the transform is a position. So the scale is going to be default one time, the rotation is going to be unrotated, but they're using variables passed in through the function parameters, using variables to set the position, and those are set when you call the function. So these 3 numbers get passed in as X, Y, and Z and get used here in the setting of the position. So you might remember the previous scene had, I've just gone back to what we're doing. It had 3 things inside the parentheses and curly braces here for transform. The equivalent here would be if I did that, I just hit a return there, and if I hit a return here, going back to this other scene, I think they have this. Yeah, they have one closed paren and the other one's out of the. Okay, so it looks like, should look like actually. Yeah, I think. So I simply have omitted the, there's two here. What is this? This goes with this one. This one, by the way, code is really nice. If you're confused, like, do I have the right number of open and closed parentheses? You put your cursor on one, it shows you the matching one. Really helps you sort things out. There's no syntax error here, so this is right. I just want to format it similarly here. I'm just going to copy these lines in here and put them in here for reference. Oops. So the way they did it was, they hit this here. And here. It really feels to me like I have one extra. Oh. Yeah, I have one extra parentheses opening it here, so I need the closer. Okay, so I'm just trying to kind of arrange this the same way. If you put these two guys in here, and put a comma here so that it's happy. Now I've actually specified in the same function, this spawn cube, I've specified all three things. However, I don't have parameters up here to pass them in. So in this using this spawner function from their DCL init example, you can only specify the I'm just kind of putting it back to the original syntax here. You can only specify the position with the three parameters you're passed in because you haven't passed in any other parameters for the other ones. But this is a way to do it. If I wanted to spawn another cube, and if cubes were all I was interested in, probably have to put a 2 here so it doesn't complain. So this one's going to be farther north, farther east, and farther up in the air, right? So if I go to the scene here, I've spawned 2 cubes. They're not rotating. I took the whole rotator system out. So kind of as expected, there's another scene. There's the second box is higher up and farther north and farther east. So that's the second way that you can get code together to put things into a scene. However, it's kind of limited because it's cubes, right? So let me show you a third way, which is the way I use normally. It makes use of this concept of having a spawner function, but I collect spawner functions for a number of different types of shapes into a separate module file, which I use in all of my scenes, and I just import it. And then I only need things like this to make things in the scene. So let me show you that. I'm going to start with a DCL init here in this empty directory for, you know what, that's misnamed. Rename lesson 3, this should be, yeah, to lesson 3. I want this to be scene 3, okay. DCL init. I'm going to make these all these scenes available after the class, so you can have them to restudy. Okay, so having run DCL init in here, I have these things, and this has, of course, the game.ts file from the rotating box because I just said DCL init. So I have a in my WebVR path, I have a directory called library. We've been working down in the one called class that has lessons for scenes for different lessons. But in my library, I think I showed this last time, I have a folder called scene base. And it has a bunch of stuff that I use again and again in scenes. It's just really convenient. And this is available to you. How to get to it is described in a previous lesson. But I can also show it to you again right now. Let me show it to you right now, which is if you go to GitLab, and you're gonna have to create an account to be able to get in, I think. I'm probably gonna visit it for free. Is it not gonna remember me? There it is. If you look for a project, excuse me, a group called DCL_tech. That's a library that I've created with a bunch of scenes in it, and one of them is scene base. I have some scenes in here that are not open to the public, but scene base is. If you go in here, if you are familiar with Git and have it installed, which you will come to do later, you can use this URL. You just put git space clone space and then this URL, and it'll build a directory for you with scene base in it. But if you're not yet familiar with it, you can do a download from, I always have to look a little bit to see where the download is here. There it is. If you do a download here, you'll get a zip file. You can pick what you want, a zip file. It'll download to your downloads directory. And in there, you have a scene directory. And in the source directory, under modules, I have a bunch of modules, but the interesting one is the spawner functions. So I'm just going to drag that over into my scene in a module subdirectory. So actually, I could also do it from where I have it on my computer already, but just for grins, I think I'm in, I want to be in lesson 3 here. Under the source directory, I'll create a modules directory. It's an arbitrary name, but it's commonly used by builders in Decentraland. And in here, I will drag this spawner functions. And then I also, up one level, have a game.ts that has a bunch of standard stuff in it that I use. So I'm going to replace the one that was made by DCL init with a rotating box. I'm just going to drag this into over the top of the existing one, replace the file, and open up game.ts. And what you see is a bunch of import statements, most of which are commented out, and some other stuff that I commonly use in scenes, but I have you know, some ground texture, etc. I'm going to actually delete, and maybe I'll leave the scene parent in. I'm going to delete this stuff, which I use for some issues with flickering things that are too close to something behind them in Decentraland, especially when you're far from the center of the world. They've been fixing that bug. I'm going to delete all these other imports that I'm not using in this scene. This is kind of often what I'm doing when I first think of a scene is I'm saying, what do I want from my standard tools? And this ground cover module is not being used in this scene. I do have the scene base entity, and I'm importing this modules that I brought in. The syntax here is ./module/ and then the name of the module without the TS ending. And you specify the methods from it or classes from it that you want to use. And we're going to use a couple of different ones from it. So if I go const pine tree, And it's not a new because it's just a function, like their spawner function. So which in the previous scene, they're not on this line instantiating a new object. That's happening inside the function. So now Visual Studio Code suggests things that you might want to use. And inside the module, there's actually two versions of each of those spawners. One with an X on the end and one without. And I use the one with the X because it has all 9 parameters, whereas the one without, just like theirs, only has the position. So if I put that, and I put parentheses and where I want it to be, let's put it in the middle of the scene. And I often put a space kind of that's the position parameters. And then for rotation, which comes next, I'm putting no rotation. I'm using a Euler, three parameters for the rotation. And scale, well, we know that tree is huge, right? So I'm going to put, what did we end at 0.02? And we also pushed it down a little bit, like negative 0.8, I think. And it's still complaining that the syntax isn't right here, and it's even telling me what's wrong with it. It's expecting 10 parameters, and I only got 9. And the reason is because this particular function also takes as its first parameter a shape object. So I need to put in that const pine tree shape. And I'm just going to, rather than spending all that time typing it, I'm just going to go back here and get it here. There it is from the other scene that we made. Right? That says, give me a shape. But I need to say equals new. So GLTF shape. Now, this line's happy. No syntax errors here. This one's still unhappy because I haven't put this variable name as the first parameter here. Now everything's happy. This is grayed out because I haven't actually made use of this variable. It's just telling me you've created a variable and you just haven't used it. And that's true. This spawner adds it to the engine. It does not set the parent. So I want the parent, I want it to be parented to the scene. So I go pine tree dot set parent the scene. Like that. So this is a little more terse than what the builder makes for each thing, because I've taken all the stuff that is just the same every time and I've stuck it inside these spawner functions. You can see these are grayed out because they weren't used, but this one was used. And I can right click on one up here and go to the definition, and Visual Studio Code will open up that file, that spawner file, and here it is. It has a base spawn entity with all the parameters, which builds the thing but doesn't give it a shape, but it does give it a position. It puts it to adds it to the engine. And then, like for the spawn GLTFX, I'm passing in parameters which get passed into the spawn entity, and then I add a oh yes, that first parameter of shape is passed in as an S variable, and I'm adding that shape to the component. So I call the raw spawn entity at the top, which does all the heavy lifting of setting the thing up in space and making it visible. And then I add the shape to it. So this, there's some code here, but if you're building a complex scene and you're using a lot of these things, it's just easy to have this utility function. And then this scene is pretty simple. If I want to add a box to the scene, I simply do this. I get rid of this line because I don't need to go get the model externally. I spawn a box with the X on the end. So, and I want to move it, for, this is going to sit in front of the pine tree. And actually to the east of the pine tree as well. And for the scale, just go back to 111. I could take the X off of here and all these parameters off the end here, and it'd be good. It's complaining here. Why? It's complaining. It says there's too many parameters, right? It's not actually complaining. Maybe here's where it'll tell me that. Yes, we got 10 parameters, expected 9. It's because only the GLTF version of spawn needs to have a shape added. All the others, the spawner functions know by the name that the box is added. It is added, but it's added inside that spawner function. So I want to actually set the parent of the box in this case. And now I'll, just by adding these 2 extra lines, I have full control over creating a primitive entity with full, position, rotation, scale, and its parenting. It's very simple syntax compared to what I had to do back here for adding something. So if you're adding a lot of entities, this just gets a lot more terse. It's easier to see what you're actually doing in the scene instead of just being buried. I mean, there's not very much stuff in the scene, but if you look at the amount of code, it's, pretty dense, hard to read. So I find this spawner, then, you can name your scene here. Now let's just look what it does. Oh, this isn't going to work because I don't have the GLB moved over to the scene from the other one. So let me do that first. Just going to grab this. Oh, we don't need all this models directory. Oh, by the way, here's a wonderful tool. If you don't already have it, it's Beyond Compare. It's not very expensive, and I use it all the time to do things like I want to compare this scene. I right-click and say, show me this on the left side of compare, and show me this on the right side of compare. Compare to less than 3. And now I have this two windows. Like, there's my scene 1 from today, and here's my scene 3 from today. And what's different? Well, let's see. I have a pine tree that I want to move over. I go all the way down this directory structure and say copy to right. And it creates the model parent directory and puts that in here, and it shows me that now there's nothing missing. It's gray instead of blue. I don't need any of these other things. I don't need the bin directory. The source, yep, my game has been changed, and I have a modules directory on the new one that the old one didn't have. So it's really nice for comparing things and for moving things between scenes. Beyond Compare. It's a very nice tool, not very expensive. So I'm going to go here. I'm in scene 3, DCL init. Nope, start. And Decentraland box, I think that the origin of the box is in the middle of the box, so half of it's underground here. So let me just go back and clean that up. I actually want this up. I think they're 1 meter cubes. Is that true? What did they do back in the original for a cube? Oh, they don't have a cube in here. It looks to me like it's half underground, right? And I think that, oh, the one, the DCL init one is floating above the ground by about the size of a cube, right? What did they use for the height here? again, spending lots of time figuring out how to adjust position and scale and rotation of an object. So it's this one here. This cube is 1 up in the air. It's probably actually half a meter gap under it. So I'm going to go to my current scene and move it up half a meter. I think it's a half meter box, a 1 meter box with its origin in the center, which means it's half underground. And I think that will fix it. It should be sitting on the ground now, but not floating above it. We'll take a break for any questions that people may have. I'm going to look in the Zoom meeting for, where's my meeting window? I have a lot of windows open here. Here, that's what I'm looking for. It's not like anybody's, no, it's the wrong meeting. Meetings. Oh, I'm being silly. It's here. Chat window is here. Excuse me. Okay, so a bunch of comments from today. The units for position and scale, for position are meters. Units for scale are a multiplier. It multiplies the size of the shape by its default shape, default scale. So the box primitive in Decentraland is by default 1 meter on a side. So if you say a scale of 1, you're going to get 1 meter. If you say a scale of 2, you get 2 meters. Rotation is in angles. So 180 would be rotated halfway around. Okay, yep, the other transform, yep. So I think I've answered that one. Yeah, the numeric scale is in degrees. That's right. Rotation per second. If rotation is per second, no. The timing of the rotation is in that rotator module, which is rotating at, as I recall, the time delta, which is 0.03333 times the number they have there, 10. So it's rotating at about 0.3 degrees per 30th of a second. So that's entirely, the speed at which it rotates is determined by the rotator. The amount it rotates each time is the result of multiplying dt times 10. Okay. Yes, you can scale in Blender before you export it, or you can scale in the scene. I generally like the objects I'm going to use to be the right size when I bring them in and scale them by 1, unless I'm wanting to make them really big or really little, but as a kind of a default size. So I often will rescale them in Blender before exporting them. But if you don't have the skill to do that, you just rescale them in the scene. This is where you can find out how big it's going to be, as Catherine has said here. Top right corner of Blender. Yeah. You're not going to hurt your Blender scene if you try exporting with various changes. So you can always undo in Blender or make a copy, do a save as on the Blender file, try some experiments and export different things, try it out. No harm. Just make a copy of your blend probably before you start doing it. that was one of the two things I wanted to review today. The other is I just want to do a very quick review again of Blender. Such an important tool for people that I just want people to be fairly comfortable with the basics of it. So if you say File New, by the way, this is Blender 2.80. Don't use 2.79. The world is migrating to 2.80. The user interface works quite differently. So if you say File New, or if you just open it from scratch, you'll get a scene that has one cube in it. Now the Blender cube is 2 meters on a side. Just for your information. And I like to be able to rotate by using Alt left mouse button click, but the default for rotating is center mouse button. Well, a lot of us don't have a center mouse button. The scroll wheel on my Logitech mouse acts as a center button, but it's just really awkward to use. So I say, look, I don't really have a 3 mouse button, so I go under Edit Preferences, and under the Input tab here, I say emulate having a 3 button mouse, and that means that an Alt plus left button click is a center button click. So now if I hold the Alt key, click on the ground and turn it, I can rotate things around and look at it. And you can see, if I look down on it from the top, that these are 1 meter grid. If you zoom out, you see 10 meter grids, and if you zoom out some more, I think you probably see 100 meter grids. And you might even see something finer if you zoom in more. I don't know, maybe not. Oops. This hand up here is for moving things over. So I'm zooming in some more. No, 1 meter is the finest it gets to. Okay. So, this cube is bigger than the default primitive cube in the Decentraland SDK. So if you import it and you want it to be a 1 meter cube, you're going to have to scale it by 0.05 in all 3 dimensions. I mean, 0.5. All right, when you create a new scene or you import a GLTF into a new scene, you have a series of tabs at the top that are different. They're called workspaces. And I'm going to show you what a few of them are for, but I'm not going to, you can kind of guess what some of the others are for, but we're not going to go into them right now. The layout is basically saying, let's treat every object in here in object mode, because I'm not editing the particular object, although I might be moving it around. I'm not like moving its vertices. So layout is for like working with multiple objects, working with your lights and cameras and moving things around. Modeling by default puts you into edit mode instead of object mode. And now you have the ability to mess with the object vertices. That's when you're on this view. If you click on edge select, now the thing you'd be messing with is edges. And if you put on face select, the thing you'd be messing with is a face. And so I think in a previous lesson, I grabbed the vertice and moved it. Now maybe I grab excuse me, I select that, go to move mode, and I'm moving a whole edge. Kind of an interesting shape, right? Very often when you open up some sort of a complex model that you buy or you get from somebody, the object over here will say cube because they started modeling it from a cube, but they added extra vertices, did a bunch of stuff to it. But you can rename this to something else like weird shape. I'm opening up this one a little bit more so we can see more of what's in here. There are some nodes over here. What do they call them? I'm going to call them nodes. I don't think that's quite the right word. In this scene, there's a shape, a light, and a camera. Camera says where you're seeing the scene from. The light says how it's being illuminated. The shape is the shape. And when you click on a shape, you'll see the mesh. And there may be more than one mesh in a shape. And when you expand the mesh, you'll see any materials that are applied to it. We'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to skip over the sculpting workspace and go over to the shading one. This is the one that says, this is the basic, looking at the materials of your scene, like you want to put color on the thing. And by default, Blender uses the very shader that Decentraland likes. I think it could be a coincidence. It could be that both Blender and Decentraland decided to use this very popular one that comes, I think the heritage of this comes from Disney Studios. And it's the one that's the most versatile, does most of what you need for putting a material onto a shape in Blender. It has, you can set the color, you can set how shiny it is, how rough the surface looks. There's just a number of things here. You always have to take the output of it and put it into a material node. These things are called nodes. If you want to add a node, you do it in this view. Remember, you're on the shading view. In the node map, you add, and there's all these different kinds of nodes that you can add, but shaders have a list of shaders, and there's two that are really useful in Decentraland. One is the principal BSDF that does almost everything you need. But unfortunately, the for whatever reason, the emissive emission that says light like emanating from the object just doesn't work out of the BSDF shader. So to get something to glow, you have to make a little bit more complicated thing and use the emission shader. So let's put that here. And you need to get its output mixed into this. So you need to add a node called add. I think it's at the add shader. You put that here, and you take the output from the BSDF, and you put it into one of the nodes here, either one. You take that from the emissive. By the way, because I broke this connection, you see it lost its material, right? If I connect this back up, you'll see the material again, which is just white. Let's just change the color on it so it's more obvious that it's something else. And then I clicked on the base color, got a color selector, make it some color I want. And the brightness of that is that slider on the right. And also you have three different ways you can work with the values of red, green, and blue, like RGB or hue, saturation, and VVV. Somebody knows what V is. So I want this thing to emit light. So I also add the emission output. And now if I take this object and put it in world, it will glow. I want to point out what these guys up here do. This says, how do I want to look at this object? Do I want to just look as a solid without any material applied? Do I want to use a simple material view, or do I want to actually look at it as it would be rendered by the rendering engine in here? I'm going to click away from the object so that it isn't selected. And I'm going to rotate it around a little bit. Maybe a little hard to see that it's emitting light unless I turn this up brighter maybe. And maybe I want it to emit a light that's more like what the color of the object is. So maybe so that it glows something like that. And then the strength of it, if you turn it up enough, it's like it washes out the camera, right? Makes it white. You turn it down and it just glows a little bit. I want to go up here and show you a few more things that affect the appearance. The default light that they give you is, I think it's a spotlight, it's a point light. I have found that to get an imitation of what it's going to look like in Decentraland, you want to add a couple of lights. One of them which you click on the light and you go down here in this thing and you click on the light here. Instead of being a point light, I want a sunlight. This is being limited right now by 1,000-watt light. There's also area lights that just kind of come from a direction. And you also say sun. Whoa, that's bright. That's because it's 1,000 suns instead of 1,000 watts. So maybe just one sun would be enough. Thank you. And but it might be nice to get some additional light on it, and so you can add another light. One way to do it would be to right-click on this and copy, and click up here and say paste. And now I have a second light. They're both suns, but I could make the second one maybe an area light, and maybe 500 watts. I think something like this is pretty similar to, it's similar to what the lighting you're going to get in the world. So now this object is kind of like what it might look like in Decentraland. So let's export it and see what it looks like. File, export, GLTF. I've made a couple of operator presets for GLB and GLTF with the apply modifier on, but just manually I'll just set this to GLB, apply modifiers. You don't generally need them, but you sometimes don't know if a model has appliers in it, modifiers in it, and so I always turn that on. And then rather than looking and hunting for our scene, I'm going to go back to where we have the scene here. Go into the spawner function one, Control C, put that up here, Control V. Now I'm in the right place. Go into the models. Create a new directory. Here's the button for that. It's a little plus thing. Weird shape. Double click. I want this thing to be called weird shape. I could type .glb here, but it will add it if I don't. So then I hit the export GLTF button. And when it's through exporting it, it will come back to here. And now over in my scene, in models, I have a weird shape. And Babylon JS Sandbox is an interesting tool. It just gives you an opportunity to see one interpretation of a GLTF that's a pretty good one. Oops, yeah, there it is. When you see this view here, you can just take this GLB or all of the files of a GLTF and click on them, drag them here, and you'll see your shape come up. And it has a rotation ability. It's a little hard to see that it's glowing very much, but it is. I could turn that up more. Let's say I want it to be a little more glowy. So I go back to shading. I go back to the material, which is on the object mesh material. And then down here on this material, well, excuse me, here, I'm going to increase the strength of the maybe to 2. That's pretty bright. You still see it has color, but it's glowier now. So I'm going to export that again. I'm just going to double click there. It is GLB here. Let's double click here. And let's just see what it would look like in the scene. I think it'll glow brighter here too. Maybe we should test that. So hit the backspace here so that I get the, oh, I could have hit a Control F5, I guess. So I get this drag and drop space and I drop my weird shape in here. Does it look glowier? Hard to tell. Maybe. It would actually be interesting. The way I guess you would tell is you would like hide your lights. So There's no lights illuminating the scene now, so this is all you're seeing here is the glow. So it does seem to have glow. Okay, the glow is brighter than by far than the illumination on it from the lights. So here's our scene 3, right? So let's go to scene 3. Add one more thing here, which is a lot like this pine tree. It's a GLTF thing, so I'll put it down here, and we'll call it weird shape. Weird shape. And let's put it close to the front corner. So 2, 0. Oh, I think that it actually sits below the ground a little bit too. So let's put it 3, 0, 2. So it's 2 east and 2 north of the front left corner, the west southwest corner, and 3 meters up in the air. And I can use the default size scale. I leave the space in here just so I can see what's going on better. And then Control S, come back to the scene folder, Control C. You see, I'll start. Making a whole object emissive is sometimes a little hard to tell that it's emitting light. But if you have a portion, like one face emitting light, or one area that's acting like a lit button or something like that, compared to something that's not emitting light, it's easier to see. So I'm not sure that this is going to be impressively glowing. Where is this thing? Oh, I'm still getting the tree shape in here. I didn't change the shape. What did I not do here? Yep. So I think it was called weird shape directory and weird shape GLB. Is that true? Did I have that right? Yes. So I saved that. I think just reload here with the Control F. I think I mentioned last time that when you're adding new materials or GLTF objects to a scene, there's a bug right now that you actually have to restart the engine by doing a Control C and a DCL start. Oh, it's glowing. It's not even glowing, but it's lighting up the tree. Look at that. Isn't it? No, it just appears to be, but it's definitely glowing brightly. So there's that. I'm going to
Sorry, Carl, it shines because of the emission function, yeah?
That's why it glows, yes. And let me go back to Blender and show you that I used an emission shader rather than Alt-click, drag, rather than the emission here. This emission in this shader has no effect. But by using the add shader, combining the color with an emission capability in this add shader, it's not like adding it like partly yellow and partly blue. It's like color plus emissiveness being added together as really two different types of shaders, but being combined in an add shader and then being applied to the surface of the material output. Material output is what you're actually seeing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome. This is not the most complex node you'll ever work with, because if you have a texture map applied, you're going to have some more stuff over here feeding into this BSDF shader. We'll get to that later when we do a materials class. It does kind of look like there's a light being cast on this object here, but it might just be that what you're seeing is the shadow on the front part of it. I think that's what the sun is casting a shadow through of this thing onto this box, and you're seeing the darker part here. It's not that this is being illuminated by this. So emissive is not a light source. It is for lighting other things. that would require a light object, which is not yet supported in Decentraland other than the sun itself that they put in the scene for you. That'll come later. Just to finish up a couple more tabs here. When you have a more complex object, let me go back to actually, let me save this just somewhere. You know what, I'm going to save it where I will also include it with a scene. So this is the weird shape.blend, and where I want to put it actually is in today's lesson folder, which is oops. There, I don't want to put down in the scene because blend files don't belong in scenes, but I'm going to put it just above the individual scenes of today's lesson, lesson 3 review, and save the Blender file there in case somebody wants to play with it. Okay, so I was showing some of the workspaces at the top. Layout is for working with moving things around in the scene, especially when you have multiple things. Modeling is for changing the shape. Shading is for getting this view where you have the node map for the different shader pieces, which you work with by going to the shape mesh material and clicking on the material button down here. These other views don't give you the node map. So, or maybe they do, but anyway, this is where you want to be for messing with the shader node map. Then texture paint, UV painting, UV editing are for, you know, this is very simple. I have the same material everywhere on the shape. Maybe instead what I want to do, I'm going to start a new scene, general scene. I guess general means what did I do? Okay, let me hit save. I must just move. Oh, I changed the view a little bit. Blender files hold information about how you're looking at, like what tab you're on and how you have things laid out. It's not just the content. Whereas the GLT or GLTF or GLB file is just the model. A blend file is also your workspaces. When you get a blend file from somebody else that's worked in an older version of Blender and you open it up, your workspaces up here might not be the same. But if you have one that you want to use, you can go get it here, like modeling, layout, shading. All right, so let's talk a little bit. The texture paint and UV editing go together. This entity here, this box, if I go to UV editing, what I see here is a 2D image on which all of the faces of the cube are laid out so that I can design a 2D texture file to go with this object. And if I want to use Blender to paint that, I can use the texture paint and use tools like paintbrush, I guess. I need to pick a color. I don't want to get lost in this, but basically, we'll get to it more another time. But if you paint on this here, it would appear here. You can also paint on this surface. And, oh, here's my colors. So let's say I want to, I apologize that I'm not real strong in this, and I'm not sure why it's. Catherine, do you know why I'm not getting any painting happening on this surface? Texture paint. I don't have some tool picked right.
Have you checked to make sure that you're in edit mode and everything's selected? Sorry, I know it's basic, but it happens to me a lot.
Yes. I need to go back to modeling or something to do that?
Yeah.
Looks like it's all selected. Good portion of it's selected anyway, right? edit mode. All right, so I will prepare better next time for this piece of it, but you can paint on the 2D version of the, go ahead.
It was written down that they're missing textures. Maybe this can help.
The fact that I don't have an image in here would go a long ways. So I'm going to, under texture paint, add a new texture. Call it box color. Thank you. Typically, you might want to have an alpha mask. So there, it's there we go. And then I don't have it applied to the material over here. So I go to the shading node, and there's about 3 pieces you have to build here. And I'm sorry, again, I'm not well prepared for this, but you have to include the texture, the fact that you're doing a UV, and what the UV is. There's three modules you need to add here. Let's see if I can do them quick. So there's a texture, an image texture, that you put here, and you add a node for, I think it is, it's the
input. If you go to input texture coordinate.
Yeah, that's this one. And there's one in between that is the mapping. So add a node. It has the word mapping
You
in
don't
it.
actually need to map. If you click on the eyedrop on the texture coordinate and then click on the object, it will automatically UV map that.
Say it again.
So your texture coordinate node, if you click on the eyedropper where it says object, yeah. So with that eyedropper, you can then click on your box. And if your box is UV unwrapped, then that does that for you straight away. And you just link the UV into the vector and you're good to go.
There, and color to base color. And it was black. The image actually is black. So if I go back to, and thank you very much, texture paint, and render it as material. It actually the rendering of the material. And one of these faces will actually show up over here. Don't have something right in our nose yet. Well, the other thing you can do is you can actually paint on the mixing textures detected. So it's not treating it as though there's actually a texture hooked up. Oh, that's exactly what it is. I had to say it. So I go to shading and go down here, and guess what? I didn't hook up my texture to this node, this image texture. I actually have to go say open. Pick one that already exists, which is this box color. And there's the stripies. So I will save this object as an example of how to set up a simple, I want to paint on a box. And now if I go back to texture paint, I can either paint on here, or I can paint on the thing. Sometimes it's really nice to actually paint on the thing and not worry about exactly where it goes in the texture. File, save as, texture, painted, oops, painted, I can spell someday, texture. Example, blend. And take my word for it, if you put this guy into a scene, it will look like that. So I just don't want to spend any more of our precious time on review, but I think we had some genuine questions here about getting things to show up and how to use the basics of Blender. So there we go. Let's go back to our lesson for today. And yes, where to get shapes. I mean, you may not have the skill or the time to model, and you want to just go buy an inexpensive or get a free shape. I'm going to skip ahead because we've talked a lot about these, say, primitive shapes, or what's provided by the shape entities, the shapes like box and cone and stuff in the SDK, and then about model files providing mesh shapes. So there's a bunch of terminology here. We've talked about most of it. So where do you get models? You can make them. You can buy them from a model store online. You can use the low poly models that the Decentraland Builder Library has. And you can hire or somehow incent somebody to make models for you. And here are places you can buy them. This is not a promotion for any particular company. It is just kind of the order of how often I've gotten stuff from them. I noticed that somebody in the class got a model from a free 3D. So don't take it that because I put it at the bottom and haven't used it very much, that it's like a bad site. All of these are fine. But when you go to a site, you need to be thoughtful about what you're getting. So I'm going to use CG Trader that I'm very familiar with as an example of that. We're going to go get a model from CG Trader. But before we get a model, we're going to look at some models using, every site kind of has their own tools for looking for things. So I want to 3D models, VR low poly. So it's kind of like restricted the view to low poly models. And let's say I want to find what do you want to find? A chair? Chairs are not very useful yet, right? So let's say maybe a sign, like a sign, a billboard or something. So there is a search right here. If I go billboard, maybe a stop sign. Where's the stop sign? Low poly, PBR. So I'm going to take a closer look at this stop sign and see what I think of it. See if I like it. $4. Yeah, not super cheap, but not terribly bad. How many? I'm looking down here. What's the geometry? How many polys does it have? Remember, the polys could be triangles, or it would take maybe 2 triangles to make it if it hasn't been turned into triangles. So that's 500 to 1,000 triangles. A little high for a stop sign. I mean, there's just not that many shapes here. So let's go back and look at one of the other stop signs. Like, I'm not real fond of that one. Here's a nice dirty one. And what does it look like? Again, pretty high poly count. I think a stop sign, I should be able to get it down to around 100. So this is one of the things you want to do, is look at the poly count. So even though you filtered by low poly, I did that somewhere here, up to 5K. Better. I guess I still think that you could do better than that. So I'm going to look just a little bit more. Might go with that one. $10. The other thing you can do is you can say best match, lowest price. There's some free stuff in here, really inexpensive things too. Maybe we're international and we want an international stop sign. $2. Polygons, no, still kind of high. Remember, you only have 10,000 to do a whole scene. So, I mean, per parcel. Those are cute. This might be good because you might want to split them apart. I'll show you how to do that. How many polys here? Okay, so I have 3 construction cones, and all 3 of them together are only 208. So they're 70 each, right? So that's pretty good. So I'm going to add this to my cart. Oh, I also want to look at the license. I want the royalty-free license. There is another license which is called I forget the word, but it basically means you can use it if you're working for the company whose product is being shown. So, for example, you might see a Lamborghini car. If you are a person who's hired by Lamborghini to create stuff for them, or you're writing a review, editorial use, that's the word. If you're writing a review about their product, you can use it. But putting it in your own scene, you wouldn't want to use an editorial license. You want to use a royalty-free license. That means once you paid for it, you're free to use it, but you're not free to sell it by itself. You can build it into a scene, a Unity scene, and sell the Unity scene in the game. That's fine, but you can't just turn around and put it in a store as it is. So licensing matters. If you were looking at an animal or a human character, you might want to make sure it's rigged and maybe even animated. This doesn't have any materials, but it does have textures. Oh, and then finally, the thing you want to look at is what are the formats that it's available in? Comes in FBX, 3ds Max, and OBJ with a material. We could work with either of those. Sometimes you'll get something that will come in a blend file. Perfect, you just open up in Blender. However, it may not have material set up right, so you would have to adjust that. If you bring in something external like this, Blender tends to use principled BSDF and just set it up right. So it's not a bad thing to import a non-blend file into Blender. It often does a very good job of getting it where you want. So you might want to look at some of the other things. Oh, it has some nice texture maps for things other than just color, which is sometimes called albedo. Also, like how does light reflect off it in various ways. Yeah, it looks like a pretty nice model. And it's not very expensive, so I'll add it to my cart. Proceed to checkout. Does that mean I didn't sign in before? Okay, log in. Shopping cart. Oh, I have something else in my cart. What does my cart have in it? Oh, something that I kind of liked, but I didn't. So I want to edit my cart and take that out. One of the nice things about some of these sites is that they show you what you've bought before. And when you've built a large library of objects, finding the thing you want can be kind of hard unless you like build some sort of a catalog or a scene displaying everything with labels. But if you just go to one of the vendors you've used, like CG Trader, you can go look at my purchases, and you have a nice view of the things you've gotten. A thumbnail picture of it, a reminder who you got it from. Some of you may have seen me using this thing in my Builder HUD. These trees have been in some of my scenes. So one of the advantages of using a site like this is that it gives you also a catalog of what you bought, which is kind of nice. So go back to my cart, proceed to checkout. PayPal, thank you. This kind of just gives you the whole feel for getting something, and the gamble of spending $2 on something that might just really stink. Download, and now when I download it, probably is going to ask me, oh, sometimes you have several different things you can download. Like there may be more than one download file depending upon the different model formats. Looks to me like they've used a RAR file to put everything in it that you can get. So I'm going to download that. Anybody have any questions while we're waiting for this download? Well, let me mention one other thing to think about if you're buying models. Most of the models you find online in stores like this for buildings are only the outside of the building. You can also get scenes like the inside of a kitchen. But if you just look at it, most of the times, if you get a building, it's designed to be used in a scene where you're outside the building, and it's like part of the decor for the environment. But you go inside. There's nothing inside the building. So something to think about. You can either build your own decor inside the building, or try to find a building that has interior, or hire a modeler to either make the building entirely or to add the inside to it. All right, so what do we have in here? I'm going to just work with it in my downloads. I would normally, take the time to go ahead and put this into my model library and capture the license document link, put the builder information in, etc. I'll do that later. Readme.txt. So I'm going to say, let's try the FBX first. The FBX is kind of like everything all put together in one file, typically, although sometimes it requires the external textures. But the other possibility is to go with the object, the MTL, and the textures. Just from grins, let me see if it says... Let me try it. This material has it down in a weird place. So let me see if this FBX opens up. Let me actually expand this in my downloads directory. This is not how you want to manage your content. You want to take the time to get it all lined up nicely, but I'm going to say extract here. Probably give me a folder, I hope. Yep, there it is. Oh, no, it's put it all right here. Okay, so let me see if I can import this FBX and get the whole thing. So I'm going to open up Blender, start a new file. Made some sort of change. I'll save it. Since I'm importing another model, I want to delete this default box. So it's selected, or I click on it to select it and hit delete. And then I say File, Import. You've got to pick the type, FBX, and then you go hunting for it. Well, it's here in my downloads directory. Yeah. Look at it with the, so it looks to me like it just has a, it has one of the textures applied to it, which is a dirty, pure red cone. That's what my eyes are telling me here. So let's look at that here. Expand this down and look at the texture on here. And a little different node map than the one we were using, but it's it has a the color is set with this. Let me move this down. It's a little easier to work with. And then it has a normal map hooked up to the normal. So it's using two of the textures. And if I go to texture paint, I think these textures are actually in the file. Not just the one. Okay. So using the same one, map 0, and oh, I see. It's not using a texture for the normal. It's just using numerical settings. Okay, so I would have to bring in those other textures to try something else, but let's just work with this one because it does have a map. It's applied to the whole thing, I guess. Let's look at it. Texture paint. Looks like that. There is a UV map in here that applies that to here. That tells me that you don't have to use that mapping thing. Maybe that mapping thing, if you skip it and it has it's the same as having all its default values. Okay. Typically, when you put that mapping component in, all the values in it look like zeros or ones or something. So, like I say, I'm not a great expert in this. It's an area I'm trying to learn. So this looks like it's going to export just fine. It's nicely centered. Somebody said that you can see how big things are in here. I haven't seen that before, so I select this object. Maybe in layout, object mode selected. Is there really a setting here for how big it is? Somebody said it was in one of the corners. I'm not seeing it. Of course, it could be right behind this little guy here. It has 328 triangles right there. And it says objects 1 of 3. There might be other collections. Sometimes collections can have like different pieces of models in. Sometimes you'll get when you download an object from a site. You know, I could have had 3 cones lined up here. In which case, I might choose to open it up, import it into Blender, delete a couple of them, save it out Blender as, you know, orange cone, and then open it again and delete the others and save one of them, move it over and save it as blue cone, something like that, so that I have a separate Blender file for each one. But even though it says 1 of 3 here, I'm not sure what that means. I only see one thing in here. I'm just going to go ahead and export it. Export GLTF. I want it to be the GLB. I'm going to apply modifiers just in case it has any. And I'm going to put it in, it's in downloads. I'm going to go up here and go into downloads where the other files here are and change it as orange. So road cone orange. Export. Go to my downloads directory and find this thing. There it is, right there. Control C. I'm going to go to my do it in example, I might go road cones, right? Because I might have more than one. And in here, I'll put the GLB. And then back in my scene, the editor, I'll add in addition to a weird shape, I'll add a orange road cone. Road cone orange shape. Road cones. What did I call it? As it stands right now, it would, oops, Control C. It would, road shape, no, not the shape. It will be superimposed with the glowing thing, which I don't want it to be. So I'm gonna put it on the ground and maybe towards the right in the scene. So maybe 10, towards the front, 2, that looks good. Let's try its normal size and let's go. -B simply says don't open up a new window. Use an existing one, or open one up manually or something. Just don't try to open up the. Did I just not hit return here? Oh, that's kind of weird. Okay, I scrolled while I was trying to type, so Control F5. Cross your fingers. Get a cup of coffee. So each of the stores has its own way of searching for things and filtering them and describing them and their own license materials, etc. All of the companies that I listed there have some fairly inexpensive models. You've got to look at the licensing carefully. TurboSquid is a company that is more focused on professional use for, like, in movies and games. They're higher quality models in general. Most of them are not low poly, they're very high poly. But if you do some careful searching, you can find some good stuff at TurboSquid at a reasonable price, and they put things on sale sometimes. So it's worth having an account there because you'll get the sale notices and you can go shopping. But you want to look carefully at the license. If it's royalty free, you're good, but they have other licenses too. And then the other thing is that the licenses at TurboSquid are a little different in that they're restricted from environments where somebody could copy it and make their own copies of it. So environments in which somebody can scrape the content, get a copy of the model other than you, the buyer, and go off and sell it, are an environment that are disallowed in the TurboSquid licensing. And the Second Life is an example of a environment that they frown on it, using models in, because they're scrapers. Sansar is okay. It would seem that Decentraland is okay because the company's technology, your intent, their company's intent is that the model is not scrapable. So it's my opinion, and I've heard from one employee that at the time was employed at TurboSquid, and whose opinion I trust, that we'd probably be okay. So it's a good idea to give attribution to folks that make things for us. And this scene is not only under construction, it's really seriously under construction. So let's resize this thing. I'm going to take a moment to show you my builder HUD, because I think I go into a little bit more in a later part of the class, I think. But it's really a useful thing because, you know, we've spent an interesting amount of time resizing and moving things in this class. And when you get seriously into building, you're going to have the same issue. So I'm going to bring one more thing over from my library. Let's go in here. DCL library. I'm going to left click on this and say, use this on the left side of this tool, this compare tool. And in my scene here, I'm going to put on the other side of the comparison tool, and I'm going to use it to move some pieces across that you need for my builder HUD. So first of all, you need the module called builder HUD. So I'm going to right click and copy that across into the modules of my scene. And you'll also need 2.2 models, pointer and XYZ. So I'm moving those over, copy to the right. And you need a material, the builder HUD material folder here. Copy to right. These things are documented in the file of the builder HUD TypeScript of what you need. So now this scene has the pieces it needs to use the builder HUD, but I need to hook the builder HUD up. So back in my game here, I say BH, let BH. Let and const are very similar, but const says I'm not going to reassign this variable to some other value later. It's going to be, once I assign it, it's done. So that says I could assign something else to it. So I could use const here. You know, I'm not going to be assigning something else to the HUD. Equals new builder HUD. Oh, is it really able to do that? Auto import from. Yeah, it did. Look, it added that to my. That is nice. Visual Code is so useful. It doesn't need the semicolon at the end. All right. Builder HUD. There's two things you might want to call that. This is enough to use the builder HUD, but you might want to do two things. So you might want to say builder HUD dot set default parent to the scene. The builder HUD can add new objects to the scene, and you want to position them relative to a parent, then you would do this. And then also the method attached to entity says, is there an existing thing in your scene already that you want to move around and work with? And that is the road cone, right? Not the shape, the actual entity. So now if I save this and go back and reload my scene, let me restart it because I added an object. This thing's messed up. Where are we? Interesting. Okay, we're going to start over. It's a good one anyway, right? Same thing. So this third scene from Lesson 3 review today has an example of using the builder HUD. So you can copy files from it. Yeah, here's the HUD appearing over here. in its collapsed state. And if I back up a little bit here, you might be able to see that that bright thing is very bright. Let me go to 0, 0 here so I get my sense of orientation where I am. I just changed the URL so I'll spawn in the southwest corner of the scene, and I'll know which way's up. All right, there's the southwest corner. And this thing is so big that you can't tell that there's actually a little red pointer over the top of it because it's probably embedded inside so big somewhere. But, and if you back out of the scene, all user interfaces, HUD type interfaces go away. So I'm going to do it the other direction. I'm going to come to this side and stand in the scene and turn around. And now the HUD comes back on. The HUD only works when any user interface like this only works only appears when you're inside the scene where it's defined. So you have to be in the scene to use it. So I'm going to expand it by clicking here. And this is the HUD. This says, right here says, go to the earlier or later. You can attach to many objects in scene if you want to move them all around. I just attached to one in the code. This says, which one do I want to work with? This says, I want to create a new object. Position, rotation, scale are all available here. I want to scale this thing down, and it is the only object in the scene, so I think it's already hooked up. And if I scale it down by one meter, that was pretty dramatic. Interesting. Position. Huh. So let's use a smaller scaling factor. Scale it down by 0.1. And this way. And I clicked it 8 times each way, so now it's at 0.2 probably. I think that's still too big, don't you? So let's go over here, and I think I didn't use 8 on one of them. There. I think I do want to make it a little bit smaller still this way. Now these are getting too dramatic, so I'll go 0.1. So I can change the amount I'm affecting something. About right. And let's say I want to move it somewhere else in the scene. I want to maybe move it back a little bit. So, oops, came out of the scene. So let's go over here so we get the HUD back. And I move it back in the scene some. So I go to position and maybe there. Still kind of big. Let's go to scale and go down some more. A little bit more like what I would expect, right? So then how you use this thing is you click the save. This is a little diskette, like save diskette. And click that once. And then I open up the browser's console window, but typing just F12. Nope, Control F, yeah, F12. And I'll find that it printed in the console window an output from the Builder HUD, this output right there. I'm going to copy that much, go back to my editor, and just for grins, I'm going to treat it as a comment. So I can have it here as for reference. And what I did was this is an older version of the HUD that doesn't round this down, but this should be like 040. So this is position, rotation, scale. So I want to go back to my cone and say, I moved it so instead of 1002, it's 1004. moved it back a couple of meters. I didn't rotate it. And instead of being 111, it should be 0.04. I'm just going to make maybe 3 decimal places. A little bit later version of this that I have in a scene drops it to 3 decimal places or 4. And then 0.060. So I made a lot of changes that I would have had to do one at a time with numbers in here. Otherwise, I make guesses instead of visually looking at it. And now if I do, let me close the console window. If I do a Control F5, that change should be in my scene now. It's a nice tool. I was spending probably half my time on scenes tweaking numbers and reloading and tweaking numbers and reloading. So I got tired of that and made this tool. There it is. Nice little. And because I still have it being selected in the HUD, you finally see the little pointer. It's now, I don't have it. There's no way to ask an object in Decentraland, how big are you? So I didn't have any way of putting this above whatever size it was, but there it is. And so to be done with this using the Builder HUD, I would do something like this, comment out the instantiation of the Builder HUD for now, and go up here and comment this line out so that none of this has any overhead on the building of the scene. Come back here, rebuild the scene. I'm doing this in order to get rid of that little red floater and to get rid of the Builder HUD in the scene. So now if I reload this, the HUD should be gone and the little red pointer should be gone. While reloading, is there any questions? Let's look at what the assignment is. I think it's pretty well covered by what we talked about today. Oh, here's the scene. This guy's here, it's the right size. There's no floater over it. There's no HUD in the corner. Okay, so that's how you use the HUD. And if we go back to our class document for today, assignment 4 is go find yourself a model that you want to use from one of these sites. There are free models, and some Google Poly has a lot of free models. I think Sketchfab's models are mostly free too. CG Trader has plenty of models that are like single-digit dollars. Make sure that you have one of the formats that you can work with, either a blend file, in which you might have to mess with the materials, or one of these other formats you can import, and Blender usually does a pretty good job of getting the materials right. Make sure it's low poly. Even for really large things, you surely don't want more than maybe hundreds. If it's like an object that's going to be the main thing in your scene and it's complex, maybe 1,000. But remember, the whole scene can only have 10,000 per parcel. If you're not sure, you really like a model, but it's kind of expensive and you're not sure, feel free to talk to somebody experienced about whether that model looks like it would work. Remember that buildings usually are empty inside. I provided some information about importing and what you want for your settings for exporting, and some advice about how to organize your models directory, and how to put it into the scene. We have some examples today of putting things into scenes. So I'll make sure that those scene directories are available in a zip file attached here, and I'll put it into the class too. So the assignment is to buy a model or get a model for free from somewhere and import it into a scene and take a good screenshot of the fact that you have a scene with a unique not part of the Decentraland stuff, and probably more complex and interesting than what you have the skills to build yourself, unless you're one of our advanced builders. And get a screenshot of it. And there's in this scene, what did I? Oh yeah, here's a sample with 3 trees. If you want to work with colliders, you can start to do that. We'll talk about that more in a later scene. But basically, the things I've put into that scene today, you can walk right through them. They're phantom, to use Second Life terminology. They're not physical. You can walk through them. Decentraland has a standard or a methodology for making something solid, and that's that in your Blender file, you have an additional model piece that has a name that ends with _collider. If a node in the mesh like this has _collider in the name, I'm not talking about this object. I am talking about the parent of it. _collider. Decentraland will not render it visible, but it will keep your avatar from walking through it. You could use the mesh of the object as its own collider, but it's kind of expensive to use all of that detail. You could just have a cube here that you stretched up vertical. In fact, let's do that. Let's just take a moment and do that. So I'm going to, in the scene, add a cube. I'm going to hide the, oops, I must not have done it. I'm in layout. Oh, I'm in edit mode. I don't know what that did. I'm going to undo that. Go into object mode, add a cube. I'm going to, you see it hiding in there? So I'm going to temporarily hide the cone here, and I'm going to make this thing bigger. I'm going to change its scale vertically a bunch. I'm going to also change its scale in 2 dimensions by grabbing this little icon here. Probably about this big and about this big. And I'm also going to move it up so it's sitting on the ground. And now I'm going to turn the other, open up the eye here to make the cone visible. It's really bigger than it needs to be, I think. Well, actually, it comes right up to the top of it. This is pretty good. I think I will actually make it bigger, though, in this dimension, so you can't walk through here. Now this is ugly. You can't see your original thing unless you hide it, right? There's a couple ways to deal with that. Let me first of all name it correctly. This thing has a name of, I'm double clicking here, road space cone. It doesn't have to be named the same as the object that it could be, Joe _collider. But by putting the word collider with an underscore at the end, Decentraland will treat it differently. It won't show it, but it'll treat it as a collider. Now I could put, just so that while I'm working in here, I can see what's going on better, I could put an invisible or almost invisible material on the collider, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm going to Control S. Have I never saved the Blender file? Maybe I haven't. Save Blender file, name it road cone orange. Oh, that's in, I see, it's because it's not in my downloads directory. It's here. That's okay. This is good. Save it. And export the GLB. going to pick up that name, but I'm going to put that word collider on the end, just as part of the naming of the GLB. Oh, this is in the downloads directory. Okay, I need to go grab it and pull it over to the scene directory too. All right, so there are 2 objects in this scene. You can have many objects in a Blender scene and then export the whole thing as one GLB. Or you can select individual objects, and when you do the export, you can say selected objects, and then it'll only export the objects that are selected. Or you can make different Blender files with different objects in it. If you have a complex scene and you want to cut it up, you can do that. But anyway, so I have a copy of this in my downloads directory. There it is, right there. And I'm going to move this over into my scene directory. Where's that? Here, scene 3, models, road cones. This one has a collider. So I'm going to take that name, go to my scene editor. I'm dropping it in here just for a moment, get it out of my clipboard. I'm going to copy this whole section here and I'm going to move it so it's not sitting where the other one was. So I'm going to move it a little bit more to the east. The scene is 16 wide, so halfway over would be 13. It's halfway to the edge of the scene. Do I have any place here where I don't say collider? These all look good, right? Okay. Control S to save it. Here's the scene. I'm going to Control C. Yes. I hit up arrow there to get a previously typed command, by the way. That's how I got that. Without having to type it all. Go back to the scene. Is this the scene with the bright thing and the coin? Yep. Control F5. The collider is invisible. I should be able to walk through right through the middle of this one here. But I should not be able to walk through the middle of this one here. I have to step to the side to go back. So the collider works. Questions? I think we're at the end of time. Do I have any comments here? Yes, Blender does actually a really good job of exporting GLTFs and GLBs that work in Decentraland. And it does a really good job of importing foreign things and getting the right shaders on them. It usually gets the right stuff so it would show up in Decentraland. Ember said here that something that didn't work, I guess it was obtained as a GLTF. By just simply importing the GLTF into Blender and re-exporting it, it made it work. So that's not atypical. I've seen that a few times. The main reason why you might have trouble with something is that the shaders might import in a weird way that isn't compatible. And you'll have to play around with the shader nodes, which would be, once again, in Did I really not export that? I thought I did. Clearly I did because anyway, back here in the shading, this stuff down here, there's a number of ways you can do it that work in Decentraland, but there are ways that would not work. For example, some of the other shaders besides Principal BSDF don't work. For emissiveness, you have to use a separate shader, and if not, then the emissive doesn't come over. Amongst the various nodes here that are shaders, I think there's really two that work. Well, the add shader and multiply shaders work, or mix shaders. But the ones you really want to, there's three here that you would use. Principal BSDF, emission, and transparent. Those three work. I have a document out. I think I've put a link to it somewhere in the class materials, to a whole treatise I did on how to get transparency to work, like for windows and leaves on foliage and stuff like that. And it has examples of the node map in it using transparent BSDF. I'm guessing that some of these other BSDF ones might be useful sometimes, but also you saw me use the add shader. That works. You also need the node, the material output. You need image texture. So image texture, if you're bringing in an image to use it with color or normals, just like that, and then it's out, but you hook up to the right things in here. So I think that's it for today. We've gone a little bit over time, and I hope that going a little over time is not a big problem for people. So yes, this is the support you need for your bonus work too. Anybody have any questions? Can somebody confirm that I'm still being heard?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions? If somebody's asking a question, you're on mute and I don't hear you. So if you have a question, make sure you unmute.
Yep, everything's fine.
By the way, I want to express how much I appreciate that you were working together as peers and helping each other. It's exactly what I was hoping for. So don't for a moment think that you're not supposed to help each other. That is wonderful. Thank you. I want you folks to be a team of people who work together and help each other and do projects together and help landowners do builds and projects for people. So here we go. Thank you all very much, and I'll put the recording up and the example scenes up soon after this. Good night.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. I'll see you next week.
All righty.
Carl, while you're still here, hey, it's Mike.
Yeah. Hi, Mike.
How are you doing?
Oh,
good?
I'm good. I'm good.
Any sleep in the last days?
I really have to. I have to discipline myself to get enough sleep because left to my own devices. It's kind of good that I have a day job that requires me to come in the mornings because it forces me to go to bed at a fairly reasonable hour. And on the weekend, I try not to get too ridiculously out of that. I'm a night owl. I mean, I do my best work, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. or something like that. But I can't do that on a sustained basis and also keep my job. So I'm okay. I have too much to do. I'm behind on my taxes. I'm behind on my building in my own districts. But I figured that enabling, nearly 50 people to go out and build was more valuable than any particular build I would do right now. So it's good. I'm very happy. I'm very gratified by and really enjoying doing this course.
Yeah, it's great that you do this. I mean, it helps a lot. And I think what is also great that, this exchange of people helping each other. I mean, we can see it anyway in the community. It's quite good, I think.
Yeah.
But it's always very focused then in the university chat, because
Yes.
then there's one
People-
particular problem and you
Yeah.
help each other about that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that people haven't, talked about their frustrations with the price of mana, or how do I use a MetaMask wallet, or, what is Decentraland? Why isn't Decentraland doing this, that, or the next thing? I mean, that I'm really glad that that's not where the chat goes for this this course. It's really good.
Yeah. By the way, I did run an update on Decentraland, the SDK, and it seems the sun disappeared. Can you still see it?
Oh,
It's no longer there. So this it's still illuminated, but there's no spot anymore. At least I didn't see it. I was
Yeah, the same thing. No
The
sun at all.
sun. The
well, you
sun
know what?
disappeared.
It's possible that they are moving towards instituting that the scene builder can supply lights. So they don't want to supply. They don't want to assume that you want day. Is it darker?
I wouldn't say so. No.
Just
So
the
you
same.
still have the global illumination.
Yeah.
But you just don't have the so you don't have shadows.
Yes, you do. No, shadows you have.
You just don't see the sun as a bright thing in the sky.
I don't.
Huh?
Yeah, exactly. You don't see it as a spot.
Yeah. They just want you to know which direction is southwest anymore. You have to go by shadows now.
Yes. Wait. Do you still have? Yeah, shadows are still there.
Yeah. Are they still cast toward the northeast?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So with a little
Maybe it comes back next update.
Yeah, who knows? I know that they recognize the need to allow some sort of control over illumination. It's kind of hard to make a dark cave. If you build mesh objects that are matte black, and surround yourself with them, it's reasonably dark. It did not used to be. Back with the Babylon, there was light everywhere, but now it's. So I think they're working towards something that might be a little bit more like what you have in Sansar. You have a collection of lights that are just like what you have pretty much in Blender. You have these different types of lights. You can set their color, their brightness, their position. I don't really know what they want to do as you move across the world. You don't want, like, you step into a parcel, suddenly it becomes night. So I think they have some hard thinking to do, right? It's like, wait a minute, let me step back 2 feet. Oh, now it's daytime again, right? They have the same issue with the global, I forget what you call it, the scene that surrounds things for reflection. Right now they have a canned scene from, somebody said they knew where it was, but it has cars in it.
Yes, Buckingham Palace. Someone found it out. I read
what is it?
Buckingham Palace.
Oh,
Buckingham
that's
Palace.
right. That's what it is. So, that's not necessarily what you want in a scene if you're doing a fantasy scene,
No.
for example. So they were going to eventually make it possible for you to find that. That would be another thing where if you step from one scene to another, what's reflected could change.
I did experiment some time ago, and I think I shared this with you, with lights from Blender, because you can put a light source like you showed into Blender, and I put it in a room, and it created this light of this bath of light. So it does render.
Really?
Yeah.
You were able to bring in a light from Blender? How recently?
That's half a year ago.
Oh. That was while it was no. I said because it wasn't Unity yet. They changed lots of stuff.
No, it was not Unity. No.
Yeah. So,
but
it's worth trying. It's worth trying and watching to see if imported lights start working.
Yeah, we can try that again, because I have this museum thing, and I was wondering if I should put lights inside or not, because of this situation that it's a sealed.
Yeah.
Space.
You're going to want to, and you're going to want them to solve that, and I bet they do before the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, so either I put in lights or not.
Well,
No problem.
if you put in lights and they don't work yet, later they might. You know how incremental development works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you have to make it a module and then or a component, and then you
Yeah.
enable it and edit
Ah.
the model.
Ah.
That's anyway my because I completely left. I tried with ID. I worked on this hackathon last time
Mm-hmm.
and did this landscape thing, which is basically doing layers. So we created layers, and you can manipulate the layer. And basically, we had the same problem like you tried with the head-up display. That we wanted to have something where we can manipulate larger spaces, larger states. You know, that you can pick and define a number of shapes, GLTF shapes, and then position them, and then rotate them, make them smaller, make them bigger.
Yes.
All the things. You do this on a let's say on a interactive way, object by object, and we did it programmatically. So you basically take a piece of paper with little I don't know, with a matrix or something like it, and then you draw your like an architect would do. You draw your landscape, and then you put it into the layers. But okay. So
I'm going to show you. You got me inspired. I am listening, but while I'm doing that, I'm going to bring up a scene from the conference center where there's some buttons that change the DJ setup on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Swap it out, and so I think I should get a code here soon.
By the way, while you're loading, I did assignment 3, and it looks like I did assignment 4 as well.
Yeah, they're kind of like, yeah, they're
because it was
they're
just
very
to
similar.
create a simple shape or whatever in Blender, and then to bring it into a scene. And I already did a download from 3D, and basically did that what you ask for, assignment 4. So I'm very efficient.
I'm going to. Excellent.
How do
I'm
you
going
call this?
to give up
Two
on.
birds,
I'm
one
not
stone.
getting my code. Yes. Oh, poor birds. Of course, there's virtual birds with mesh stones, so it might be okay. I'm going to do it from locally because I'm not getting my code. So let me change directory to.
What were you looking for? Just.
I'm going to show you the cafe scene from the conference center with buttons for. So the patio Unity cafe scene. So this is 3631 now. Okay. They're making progress. There was a bunch of stuff announced that was going to be in 6.3 very recently after 6.3 was already out.
Yeah.
I don't know if those things are already in there or that they're appearing during the 6.3 sequence or what, but I'll be very curious.
Yeah, every once in a while they do write a little version text where they, but it can be rather abstract, so it's a bit of guesswork. Would be great if they can give for the incremental releases what they change. I mean, if they fix one thing or something, that's
I have lots of scenes in different districts, and of course, if you just start the scene up, you're at 0, right?
Mm-hmm.
In
you're
the
nowhere.
preview space. Yeah, so I have all these bookmarks for like the scene in the real world, but also as a preview at the right coordinates.
Yeah, did you had a chat with the developers that we have something like, I mean, we have the base parcel, that we have something like a start from here parcel, or
there's a in the scene.json file there's already an accommodation for that. Yes, yeah,
but it's not working.
I don't think it's working yet. No.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take a moment for the cafe to show up. There it comes. You like the shiny
It's so-
things?
Yeah, it's so cool if it builds when it builds up.
Yeah. So Rosa, who's in the class, she might still even be on the call, is a very active DJ in Second Life. And she contacted me and said, do you need a DJ somewhere? And I said, how about in this cafe here? And so she's also a modeler, and she made some DJ setups. So there's some secret buttons in this scene. Don't tell anybody.
Oh, I just see Rosa didn't join because she was missing the link. I'm just in Discord.
Oh, no. But there's one of her DJ setups. It's a star. It's kind of neat.
Mhm.
And I don't have colliders on this stuff in here yet. And then there's this one, which is lovely.
Mhm.
Nice work, Rosa.
So that's making it visible and invisible, or
That's right. It's actually tearing it down completely. It's not just taking out the
you
engine. I've actually,
destroy it.
I destroy it. I set the variable to null.
Mhm.
So it releases it from the system. And
Mhm.
that I take it out of the engine, but that's not enough to, I mean, I see some weird stuff happening when I remove things from the engine sometimes.
Mhm.
That's kind of an unusual and interesting one. And then this is the one she made most recently. And you see the secret buttons here?
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody.
No.
So
There are a few people still listening.
I know. I eventually will probably change it so that you have to have permissions to click the buttons. But nice work she did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like having put these mannequins around because it gives you a sense of that you're not alone in the world, and you can see the size of things too. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it can be kind of hard to see. These are from Google Poly. They were free, almost anime look. They're nice.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, pretty low poly and quite well done. I got 4 of them from this artist. Anyway, so there's that.
That's pretty cool. So the music, did you try out music already?
I have put sound in a scene, so I know it works. But I've been collecting royalty-free music. I used to teach electronic music at the University of California, and I have some students who contact me from time to time and say, "Hey, look what I've done." And one of them sent me 3 or 4 of his albums, John Schofield, and I said, "Hey, can I use these in Decentraland for music?" And he said, "Certainly." So I don't have to pay ASCAP for those.
Yeah, I also have an artist friend, Philip Wilkerson, and he said I can use it. But it's less dance floor. It's more like ambient music. In the end, he's okay. You just want to be quoted.
Yes, I'm going to give attributions to lots of artists. Oh, I was thinking I was in the world. No, this is an isolated scene. This is one big scene. I have a lot of really big scenes in the conference center.
Yeah.
In order to get polys.
Just out of curiosity, do you already have something in Etheria? Because I was walking around a little bit in Etheria, but there wasn't. At least I didn't see anything. But okay.
Yeah, let me give you a URL to one thing I have in Etheria, which is 137, 136.
Okay, that's easy to remember.
Yeah. What it is a prototype of the. I'm trying out some mechanisms for somebody being able to pick a piece of land and say they want to do something with it. So this is the preview of it. It was an slightly earlier version of this was the hackathon entry for Etheria.
Mm-hmm. Is it the where you can rent land? Is it that one?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw that.
It is up on the land somewhere. Why is this not loading? That's interesting. What did I do?
There's the sun still. So
But this is not new. This is I've not redone this. SDK is probably 2 weeks old at least.
yeah, it's also missing the logo on the right corner.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Well,
Hit
interesting.
if you check F12 if something is not loading, maybe.
Yeah, could be. Do they show now? No, there's nothing showing.
No,
I've had things not load and not report that they're not loading. I don't know exactly what the logic is for the console showing that something is.
Yeah, true. Maybe it requires a DCL upgrade, that you delete the bin, the node modules, and the package JSON, package log JSON. And then
I'm so silly. Guess what scene I'm still running, of course. I'm still running the cafe. I just changed my coordinates without changing what. That was the problem.
Yeah.
It's just 612.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's even older, yeah.
Yeah, but what's up in the world is they are always using older versions ask for MetaMask.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me fix that. Let me try it with the latest one.
Yeah, I think you can just run a little update.
I think you have to actually. It's on what it says in here. If it says, no, excuse me, package. Yeah, see, it won't load something newer until I change that. So let me.
Okay, true.
I don't know the syntax for this field really. I think that when you're saying latest, you just say latest. There may be some options there. There's there's up arrow, and there's nothing. And I don't know which ones you're supposed to use when, but I think I don't want a new window. Install. No, I need to do npmi. Sorry. Now it'll install the latest.
I always go with latest.
Mm-hmm.
You can have next, isn't it? That's the
the bleeding edge.
Mm-hmm.
With emphasis on bleeding.
Yes, you bleeding, or you seen.
Still outdated. What did I do?
Maybe it's still missing something. What did you delete? I think you need to delete node modules, right? And the package log.
I'd be glad to do that, but oh yes.
It's bin, node modules, and the package log. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't need to do this one, but
yeah, you want to be sure not to delete the wrong one.
Is this? Why is it? Oh, it's possible the latest isn't the right syntax. Let's see what I get this time.
No, latest is good. That's correct.
It's not telling me which one I got.
If you do run the start, it should tell, no?
Yeah, I thought for a while the npmi was telling you which one you got. I think the regular installation of the DCL global package does. But it's saying it found the latest one now, so we're good.
Yeah.
And I didn't say -B, but here I am at the right place here, approximately. And if I reload this now, I should see something. I will be too far. Did I say 136, 137 or 137, 136?
137, but okay, it's close.
So I'll be 2 parcels over to the west.
That's the latest. There's this logo in the upper right corner. Decentraland logo.
Oh, there's still a glare on the ground from southwest.
But
West,
that's it.
north, east. Why am I not seeing anything? Still not. What scene am I running? Oh, it's the rental office. Duh. Yeah, the scene does exist somewhere, but it's not different coordinates. So we'll get there yet.
That's a newer version.
So I guess when you use latest, you don't need the caret, huh?
No, just like that, yeah. You mean not updated? This I don't know. I always delete it. Oh, okay, seems to work.
So
I've created a certain practice of, let's say, Mike's best practice, which is I have my models all in GitHub. And
yes.
I never work on the game TS. I never. So I can always run from scratch. And I have different files. I just import them. So I just have to do one line statement and then it's importing it. So that's how I get around. And I can always initialize a scene from scratch.
As in...
So I have a library folder, like you. I have a different naming, but okay. And in that library folder, I have all my classes, so my objects, which I used because I create the whole building from code. But it's a simplistic building compared to so it's not like a castle or something like that. It's a simple building, and I create everything
algorithmically created. Yes.
And
I have about every kind of imaginable combination of stuff now in all the different districts. So what I do is I'm using GitLab for scenes, and I only check in the things that you need to pull, and then do an npmi to build. And I try to check in latest in the package .json instead of some particular thing, but there might be an argument sometimes for checking one that works, but the problem is that they always use the latest when you run it. So it's best to use latest. And I don't check those things in, so I can run an add and a commit and a push from a scene without worrying about bad stuff going up. And I've actually made a better version of this that doesn't push up some other things. And similarly, I have a bunch of stuff in here, and I should really have .blend in here now too. Actually, I've updated this in my scene. What's the word I want? My scene base scene, so that it has. But I was doing some development in Vesta, so I sometimes have a Vesta folder over here. I have some batch files that I use. I think from about here to here is standard, but all these things down here I added.
Mhm.
So anyway, I think, where am I at now? Let me just be real clear. That's the main thing. Now we should see something in that location.
Mhm.
I said 137, 136.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but of course I would also be curious to deploy something to there it is, to Ethereum at some point,
Mhm.
a demo version, because
Yeah. We have a lot of land to fill.
Yes.
Pre has made a PRAX. Pre has made a in a tool, a design tool that she had. She's made a 2D and 3D representation of the entire map, and some videos to walk around in it. And I haven't had the time since she did it to walk around in, which I'll probably do this weekend. And I don't know, but I think that her content is deployable. So if so, we'll have at least default content. But we have both contributors who have asked to have some land of their own. Come on, don't do that. It's like frozen here.
Yeah, kill it
Uh,
if it doesn't come again.
that's just weird.
No, I have the same every once in a while.
I don't know what that's all about. Just reload the thing. But
Yeah, because that
so
would also be
there's a fraction of the
interested.
land that was claimed for private use by contributors. It's still owned by the district, but they'll have rights to build what they want on it. And then the majority, I should say, the vast majority of Ethereum is community land, and we will rent it out, and we'll probably do demos on it. Oh, it's like putting my cursor up there in that. It's a cursed cursor.
Yes. But I can still.
I can hit W's, but I can't hit backspaces. That is really weird. Escape? Huh. I don't think I've ever seen that.
If you resize the browser, does it have any impact?
Yes, sure does. And probably now I can delete this off of here, right? Oops, I don't want to delete that much.
No. But okay, I mean, the scene is there.
Yeah, I know. I'm just curious to see. No, really, you can't delete it.
You're like me. You don't give up.
So you can see that there was a problem that I was dealing with at the time when I built this. Do you see how far I put the text away from the?
Yeah.
They had this flicker problem. They've addressed it. So things far from the.
Yeah.
My W's and D's and F's are all.
Don't worry.
It's
We
funny.
just ignore it.
Okay, but anyway, so that you see what it does, there's a cursor. It's on the map there, the orange spot. It's on the map here, the same spot.
Yes, and you can.
It's on the map, right? On their map app has a service where you can get this localized neighborhood image. And so if you click on the arrow, it moves all three of them. So the map, yeah, right. Of course, it's not going to work now. Who knows?
But I tried that. Now it works.
Oh, yeah. It's just slow.
Yeah.
Okay, so the dot's moving over, the page, the map's moving over, and this guy's moving over. And then if you and the numbers on the green button change, and then if you're happy with it, you can click this and it
should be able to rent then.
Yeah, it. Oh, and the other thing is that it's smart about when you are out of bounds. So if I hit down arrow a couple times here, it's getting this weird mode where it's not working. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, when you hit the edge, it turns orange and says not available. So I hooked this up to a database of what's really available, and people can rent stuff. And they just released, you may have seen the blog on it, they released some additions to the land registry such that you can now, what you could do before was for an estate, which districts are estates, you could assign an update manager or an operator, update operator.
Yes.
And you could one parcel at a time do a land update operator.
Yes.
Land update operator, right. They've now made it so you can pass in as a single transaction a list of parcels on the update many land operator.
Yeah, because I know from ID who helped deploying some models that this is rather painful. It was rather painful.
Right. If you want to provide out of a district in particular, or if you have a lot of land and you just want to, like, say, I'm going to let you use a dozen parcels out of this, you had to do 12 transactions to assign the update operator to them. Now you can do it in a single transaction. It's nice. Yeah. Save on money, save on lots of labor, reduce the likelihood of errors.
And sometimes also the models are stretching over different parcels, right? Then you're doomed anyway.
Say that again?
If you have a model that stretches over 2 parcels, you wouldn't be able to do that if you can only access 1 parcel.
Oh, you could access more than 1 parcel. You could delegate more than 1 parcel to somebody to operate, but you had to do that delegation 1 parcel at a time. And you have to do that okay.
So it's the administrative act kind of.
Yeah, it's how they've made it much easier, and you can operate all those kind of things from dApps. So we have a dApp under construction for Ethereum to do all this stuff for allocation and for permissions delegation and stuff like that. We'll hook it up to this UI at some point, and you can say what you want to rent. I probably want to say, click here to add to shopping cart. And then a button somewhere that says rent me. Check my cart and rent it all. So, but anyway, we get the idea.
Yes. So I mean, I'm one of the contributors, and I had I contributed 10. Well, I dedicated 10 parcels to community, and I still have 90 left. And I wanted to deploy the museum at some point in time.
Okay. That time will come. Yeah,
yes.
No, that time will come. We'll get all this stuff hooked up, and you'll be able to go in, and you'll pay for the transaction to assign the land update operator to yourself. That's the way we'll work it, so that we can decentralize the economics of it and the labor.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure, as always.
Yeah, thanks for the additional info.
Sure.
And looking forward. And see you soon, or talk to you soon.
Ditto.
Okay. Bye-bye, Carl. Thank you very much. Bye.
You're welcome.